All right, Proverbs 30, of course. God is great, but let's call this one once again Sketches, but subtitle it 2, 3, 4 in this proverb that seems to take that structure after the first 14 verses, meaning that there are a number of famous proverbs, once again, no longer restricted to a single verse, but packaged in 2 or 3 verses, maybe, that give us the structure that there are 2 things in some instances, 3 things in others, but it's never really just 3 things. It seems it's often 3 things, no 4, that the writer of the proverb, this time someone named Agur, seems to notice about life. But the first part of the chapter starts off with a few verses that hit super close to home if you have ever lived long enough to hit a downturn in life, one that's attributed to your own embarrassment or your own mistakes, where he starts off in verse 1, the words of Agur, son of Jacob, the oracle. The man declares, I am weary, O God. I am weary, O God, and worn out. Surely I am too stupid to be a man. I have not the understanding of a man. I have not learned wisdom, nor have I knowledge of the Holy One. However, the silver lining in a confession, that brutal, is it really opens the door to one of our dead horse verses, James 1, where it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, ask God who gives generously. And so Agur, in seeming to beat himself up, is actually opening the door to healing and gaining the wisdom that he lacks, as he is going to seem to notice something very important in verse 5 that may carry us through the rest of those first 14 verses, where he says in verse 5, every word of God proves true. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him. Understanding that the rest of the verses in that first section are going to seem to describe the ways in which we can take refuge in other things. And it seems also super similar to the way in which Psalms and other proverbs describe the danger in idolatry. Understanding that an idol is simply an alternative to the truth of the protection that God can provide us. Understanding that he's going to go on to say in verse 6, do not add to his words, lest he rebuke you and you be found a liar. Understanding that one of those alternatives is going to be lying. He's going to go on to say that one of those alternatives to the refuge we can find in resting in God and trusting him is money, of course. The other alternative we can find to confession and taking refuge in God is self-righteousness, believing we need no confession, as he seems to finish that section by helping us understand that another false refuge can be injustice, meaning getting what I need through the power of my own hand without regard to whether or not it is fair or just to those around us, even sometimes the weakest among us. As we mentioned, the second half of the chapter potentially giving us a lighter side of the writer's wisdom, where he is going to say in verse 15, the leech has 2 daughters, give and give. The second half of that verse is going to say 3 things are never satisfied, 4 never say enough. He's going to say Sheol, the barren womb, the land that is never satisfied with water, and the fire that never says enough. As we mentioned, it's going to take a brief pause in verse 17 and again in verse 20 to disrupt that 3-4 structure. But as we mentioned, he picks it up again in verse 18, where he says, 3 things are too wonderful for me, 4 I do not understand. For time's sake, we're going to skip on and simply talk about the themes, not the things. Things you will hopefully look up on your own time as we simply try to sketch the summary of the chapter. Understanding that verse 21 is going to say, under 3 things the earth trembles, under 4 it cannot bear up. Verse 24 is going to be more straightforward, simply saying there are 4 things on earth that are small, but they are exceedingly wise. As verse 29 is going to say, there are 3 things that are stately in their tread, 4 are stately in their stride. Wishing I had time to go into more detail. As the thing that probably stood out to me, and once again, this rough sketch of the chapter, is the way in which he warns us against not just lying, it is using God to lend credence to the lies that we tell or the things that we say that aren't quite true. It's that sense of insecurity that I heard another teacher once say leads us to want to name drop. Basically, not having confidence in the truth of what we said, or even worse, its persuasiveness. groping to find something to add an additional bit of credibility to the things that we say, but in which we might lack confidence. And the sad thing is that as Christians, sometimes one of the names that we want to drop to lend credence to our agenda is the name of God. This proverb reminding us that any credibility we can add to the things that we're saying that aren't completely true by invoking God's name may be nothing in comparison to the shame that we will eventually experience if he steps in and actually proves that we are lying. Which is why we sometimes say God's best to you as you go forward in him. And as we likewise sometimes say, my prayer for you is my prayer for me. God, please deliver us from the temptation to use you to promote things that really aren't about